Hi, I'm Betsy Cornwell, the author of Mechanica. Thank you so much for reading my book for your book club this month. I just wanted to introduce myself first a little bit. I am American, as I'm sure you can tell from my accent, but I've lived in Ireland for the last 7.5 years, and I'm in the process of applying for Irish citizenship. I received my MFA in creative writing at Notre Dame in 2012, and before that did my undergraduate at Smith College in Massachusetts. I currently teach at the National University of Ireland in Galway, as well as a private writing mentor, and I lead writing workshops through UND Kylemore. I'm also the story editor and digital editor at Parabola magazine, which is a leading spirituality and religion publication in America. And of course, I write my own books, and I'm a single parent to a 3-year-old, so I'm kept pretty busy. But today I want to talk to you about my book Mechanica, which is a retelling of Cinderella that was published in 2015. So the reason that I got interested in writing fairy tales in the first place is because of ideas of story structure. I became really interested in story structure as a young writer because I was told that it was my weakness. Many writing teachers when I was a young student told me that I had a talent for descriptive writing, but struggled with plot. And so I became interested in stories that did plot really well, and fairy tales were an exemplar of this to me because they were stories that held up over time and through cultures and in different tellings. There was something about their plots that was so compelling to so many people that they had survived over centuries and through different politics and cultural values and all these things. The bones of these stories kept being worked with by different storytellers. So when I was an undergraduate at Smith College, I took a class called Fairy Tales and Gender that became extremely influential on me. And so I started writing my own fairy tale retellings, which is a genre that I loved since I was a child, in response to that class. And that was actually the first place that I started working on the story that would eventually become Mechanica. As much as I admired and was fascinated by story structure, as a young woman, I was starting to feel like they were quite restrictive, like every fairy tale was leading inexorably towards only one version of what a happy ending could be, where you marry the prince and live happily ever after. They're these elegant, perfectly plotted stories, but they're just all bringing you to the same place over and over again. And Cinderella, I think, is the best example of a perfectly oiled story machine. It's it's such a compelling story that it's one of the oldest stories in the world. People have told it over and over and over again. And Kurt Vonnegut, actually one of my favorite writers, described it as pretty much the perfect story and created a chart in which you can sort of see the way that the structure works to draw people forward. So I started thinking about how I might write a Cinderella who would be capable of sort of reaching into her own story and changing it. When I teach story structure at the National University of Ireland or the other places where I teach, I always show this graph that Kurt Vonnegut made of the structure of Cinderella. And I wish I could take credit for noticing this first myself, but it was my teaching assistant who pointed out to me when I was using this graph one day in class at a summer course I taught at Johns Hopkins. He said, it looks like a heartbeat on an EKG machine. And that absolutely stunned me. I was so moved by it. I said, of course, this chart, it looks like a heartbeat. And that is, I think, what is so compelling about these stories is they, in some profound way, and maybe even in some physiological way, they reflect the pattern of human life. And so this idea that a story is of moving on from one beat and finding renewal in the next makes so much sense, because that's what happens in our lives. That's what happens in our bodies with every breath, with every heartbeat. I think you can apply that as well to even something like iambic pentameter, the meter that Shakespeare used, that so many writers use, that goes da-da, 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 da-da. It's a heartbeat. And so I think story structure and using structure intentionally in your own work is the opposite of derivative. It's truly profound. It's working with the very rhythms of our lives. And so I think that's what is so infinitely and forever compelling about the story of Christmas, which is a story of renewal, and the story of Cinderella, one of the other oldest, most culturally impactful stories that we have. All of these stories are speaking to the very human urge to move from one beat to the next, to constantly renew and find better ways of being. Setting the ball and exposition in the new year, what is really representative of the themes I was trying to work with for my Cinderella, and really for all Cinderellas, the ball is a time of renewal and a time to begin a new story, where Cinderella has been stuck in this part of her story where she is an abused household servant, mistreated by the very people who are supposed to care for and love her. And the ball is a place of salvation and beginning and renewal for Cinderella, whether that comes through a romantic connection to the prince, or in my case, an opportunity to show her inventions to potential investors. That idea of a new beginning fits so naturally with the new year and with the solstice, and really with the Christmas holiday, even though, of course, as I said, this is a fantasy world, so it's not literally going to happen at Christmas. But Christmas is, if nothing else, a time of celebration of renewal and new light and the beginning of a new story. And I think that's something that I learned growing up in Sunday school, and when I participated in Christmas plays and Advent activities, that this is the idea that Christmas and the birth of Christ really was the beginning of a new story, and of course a salvation story for the world. So Cinderella is really, like so many classical stories, like so many of the stories that humans have found so compelling for so long, is essentially a story of salvation and renewal. And so there was no more natural time for that point in the story to come to me than the solstice, the new year, the Christmas season, which is a time of darkness, but also of beauty and of new beginnings and moving towards new light.